I'm Chuck Jolley of CattleNetwork at the Western Crown Center. I'm here with Bill Bullard, CEO of RCAF. Bill was joined today by representatives of the Organization for Competitive Markets, the National Farmers Union, Domino Law Group, and the Contract Poultry Growers Association of the Virginias. They were speaking for the new GIPSA proposal. And Bill, I know you can get on a soapbox here, but can you explain your position on the GIPSA rules very succinctly?
Well, the GIPSA rule is designed to clarify how the U.S. Department of Agriculture will actually administer and enforce the 90-year-old Packers and Stockyards Act. That act prohibited the packers from capturing control over the live cattle supply chain. So because the rule clarifies how the agency will enforce the act, it provides a brighter line between what is an unlawful act and what is a lawful act. And it will provide both producers and meat packers a clearer indication of how the marketplace must function in order for it to be competitive. And so that's why we support this rule. It's because our industry is in dire need of clarifying and enforcing the 90-year-old Packers and Stockyards Act to protect the industry from industry capture by the meat packers.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the very aggressive PR campaign you've mounted. Some have even called it overly aggressive. Do you think that's a fair statement, and has it been effective?
Well, our campaign in support of the GIPSA rule has been to encourage producers to file comments with the agency, explaining their individual experiences in dealing with a marketplace that has seen competition erode over the past several decades. This is a critically important issue for our industry. The U.S. cattle industry is the last frontier for the meat packers. We're the last major livestock sector that is not already captured completely from birth to plate by the integrated meat packers. So this is a battle to determine what the future of this industry is going to look like. Are we going to allow the cattle industry to go the way of the hog industry, which means fewer and fewer producers, and which means that the meat packers are going to control the industry, and the meat packers are actually going to determine the terms of production and terms of marketing for the remaining cattle producers in the industry? We do not want to go there. Instead, what we want are hundreds of thousands of disaggregated producers in this industry that are supporting rural communities across America. And this GIPSA rule represents the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to prevent the capture of our industry by the packers, as already has occurred in the hog and poultry industries. When we're successful, we will be the only livestock industry that successfully preserved for independent producers the opportunity for independent producers to remain profitable without engaging in a production contract with the packers.
Well, sounds reasonable. Question about the rule itself. I don't think there's any doubt that it will bring some changes to the industry. Very specifically now, what will it inhibit and what will it enhance when and if it becomes effective?
Well, the first thing the rule does is it clarifies that if a packer engages in an unlawful act, an unfair, unjustly discriminatory, or deceptive practice, it doesn't matter whether that practice is targeted at a single individual, a group of individuals, or the entire industry. An unlawful practice is unlawful, period. That's critically important because that prevents the meat packers from eliminating producers one producer at a time. Second thing that the Act does is it requires the packers to maintain the documents and records necessary for the enforcement agency, which is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to be able to identify any anti-competitive practices in the market. Unless you can identify them, you can't correct them. So this rule very significantly requires the packers to keep documentation that is needed for USDA to determine whether the prices the packers are paying are based on market forces, which are legitimate, lawful basis for a price, or if they're based on purely the exercise of market power by the packer. The packers desire to try to further concentrate the feeding sector, for example, by giving preferred prices to some feeders and not to others for no other reason than they want to support their select feeders. So these are two important components of the GIPSA rule that will benefit cattle producers. Another one is it addresses the ongoing anti-competitive practices in the market. In fact, we know that when packers buy cattle from other packers, rather than going to the live cattle industry to acquire their supply needs, they are able to avoid the marketplace, thus removing cattle that should be in the cattle market for purposes of discovering price. To the extent that the packers have an alternative source of livestock from another packer, for example, they are able to avoid the competitive marketplace and thus prevent any demand signals from entering that market. Another anti-competitive practice that's ongoing is when multiple packers join together to share one cattle buyer. Thus, the packers are not bidding against each other for the cows and bulls, for example, that they're acquiring. Instead, they're having one buyer filling all their needs, which essentially eliminates competition.
One final question. The USDA will make a decision on the proposal sometime in the next couple of months based on the comments that they receive. Whether the new rule passes or fails, how do you expect the Congress to react?
Well, importantly, it was Congress that directed the agency to write some specific provisions within this rule. One was to clarify what the Act meant by a prohibition against packers providing any undue preferences or advantages to some producers. So there are certain provisions within this rule that are mandated by Congress expressly. The rest of the provisions in the rule, USDA included under the authority that they have had for 90 years under the Packers and Stockyards Act, Section 407 of the Packers and Stockyards Act. And so the agency clearly has the authority to go forward with these rules. But we know that the meat packers are among the most politically and economically powerful forces in Washington. We've already seen the effects of the meat packers' lobby in terms of convincing some congressional members to fight against this rule. So we are anticipating that the meat packers will, in fact, try to encourage Congress to block USDA from finalizing the rule. We expect them first to go through the appropriations process and try to deprive USDA of any funding for purposes of finalizing the rule. Then we would expect them to go to Congress after the rule is finalized to challenge the rule in Congress. However, we believe that Congress clearly understands the need for this rule. We have seen over the past several decades new amendments to the Packers and Stockyards Act itself in recognition of the egregious problems that are occurring in the two industries that have already gone further than the cattle industry in terms of concentration. Amendments have been made to include the poultry industry under the protections of the Packers and Stockyards Act. Amendments have been made in the hog industry. For example, in 2008, a new rule was written in order to make it unlawful for swine contractors to provide misleading market information to the industry. So we have seen an evolution where Congress is becoming more acutely aware of the problems associated with the decline in competition, and as a result, we think Congress will stand firm and that we think USDA will go forward and implement this rule, which is the first most critical step in preventing the packers' ongoing efforts to capture even more control over the U.S. live cattle supply chain.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Chuck Jolley with Cattle Network.